Today, we discuss buys, sells, and holds from the NFC and AFC East. We discuss prices that we would pay for these players, as well as trades in real leagues involving these players. Stick around for all that and more. Welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. My name is Justin, and joining me today, it's the whole gang back together like it was in our news preseason and training camp video that came out earlier this week. JP is back. David's here. Good to have everyone in one place. We're excited. We hope you are too. We're going to start off, as always, with our community question. And David, what is that?
Yeah, so this week we asked you guys for your buy, sell, and hold in the NFC and AFC East. JP, you want to go ahead and read our first response?
Our first response we have is from Aaron. He says, buy Daniels. Even if bad in real life at football, will succeed in fantasy. I think there's definitely some truth to that. His hold is Raheem Mostert, can very easily outplay his redraft ADP, and the Dolphins remain pretty unchanged from last year. Touchdowns likely will regress, but hopefully not significantly. I like that call because his value is already so low, you're not going to get much for him anyways. I'll just ride it out. And his sell he has as Javon Baker. He says to capitalize on rookie hype for a guy who, even if he hits, could be third or fourth option on a terrible offense. And he also has McLaurin as a sell, as he has little top 15 upside fantasy-wise with a rush-first rookie quarterback and has never averaged above 15 points per game. And I can understand selling off rookie hype. I personally like Javon Baker, so I'd probably hold, but I can understand the logic behind what he is saying there. But Justin, what is our next response that we have on the question?
Yeah, our next response, friend of the show, Austin. I'm just going to read he did NFC East and AFC East. Going to read his NFC East by Jaden Daniels. This guy is going to be the real deal. He's got weapons around him that I like. I also like some of them weapons. Luke McCaffrey, please start. Sell Saquon. I'm a little worried about the Eagles' decrease in O-line quality. That paired with the tush pushing, who knows where an aging Saquon will be. Hold Brian Robinson. Could see an increase in production, could see some touchdowns being vaulted, but I'm willing to wait and see. I think the Saquon one just depends on the price that you can get for him. I don't think I'm selling him for a first and a third. If I'm like a start 9, if I'm in a start 11, I'd take that. Like, I think he could be a hammer. In a start 11, I'm probably willing to sell him, but in a start 9, I think I would rather hold personally. I know that's not many running backs that I'm actually interested in, but he's kind of one of them. And then Brian Robinson, definitely agree on that as a hold. I know, David, I think you might have said on the Saquon bit that you'd take a first for Saquon. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think in most situations, maybe not start 9 or like half PPR, other formats that value running backs a little higher. But yeah, I think I would get out for a first in most situations if I could.
It just depends, but if I need a competing hammer running back, I think Saquon, probably one of the cheapest ones you can get that I actually think could do it. And what else did Austin have to say, David?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do his AFC East buy, sell, hold here. Got James Cook for the buy. He says, the end of the season made me raise my eyebrows, plus vacated targets often go to the running back. Ooh, his sell here. My heart, he's trying to sell me out. Garrett Wilson, huh? I don't know why, but his situation just scares me, and I'd rather capitalize now than be stuck holding the bag. I do understand that, and this is definitely player takey from me, which I don't love to do, but I just love Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to explode this year, and he's definitely got some inflated value based on his production, but not based on his talent. So I understand the sell, but I'm a lot closer to a buy on Wilson there myself. Hold, he has Ramondre. I think the new contract proves they like him, and I think he will outperform his value. I do think he's kind of gone a little under the radar this year. I know that offense isn't going to be good. We don't like bad running backs or running backs on bad offenses, but they've committed to him. He's shown what he can do. He has, some ability in the passing game. I have him on a team. I'm kind of just holding until we see, what he looks like the first couple of weeks as well. So I agree with him there as well.
Yeah, Austin's a pretty smart guy. Can't disagree. And so we are, again, like last week, giving our actual responses rather than right now all in a row, pretty much throughout the episode, since this is such a themed episode. So before we get along and give all of our buys and sells for each team, what is our next week's community question, David?
Yeah, we're just going around the compass here. So give us your buy, sell, and hold in the NFC and AFC South. And Justin, where can they respond?
Yeah, you can let us know in the YouTube comments below at X at DinoConFF, at DinoConstructionFF at gmail.com. All of our personal Twitter handles in the episode description as well, wherever you listen or view. So love to hear from all of you as always. Now, moving along to our first team, we figured why not start with the NFC? Why not start with the reigning division champions for the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys? JP, who is your buy?
My buy is Rico Dowdle. Now, Dowdle, he is a running back who is in an ambiguous backfield. And these situations is often where you find these running backs who are, those values and breakouts every year. It's because the ambiguity in a backfield pushes down the cost of a player because, people like to have the security and the projection that they're going to be the leader in a backfield. This one's obviously muddy with Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle. But the Cowboys, they just led the NFL last year in points scored per game. That means this is an offense that we want to have pieces in, even though we do expect that they take a step back, most likely from the best in the NFL. I still want to have the starting running back, at least have the shot at the starting running back. And I think Dowdle's my favorite bet because when you look at Ezekiel Elliott, he has 2,065 career carries and over 300 receptions. This guy, he doesn't have much tread left on them tires there. He was one of the least efficient running backs on the ground last year, too. And he's now another year older. This is Dowdle's only real competition, unless you're concerned about Royce Freeman, he's had fewer than 80 carries in every season since 2019. Or if you're worried about Deuce Vaughn, I'm not. His size, he's about the same size as me, and I'm not that big. So Rico Dowdle, he's the guy that I'll be betting on just based on what Zeke has done lately and the age. And like I said, the offense, I think that there's a good chance that a running back is a pretty consistent fantasy producer from this team.
Now, JP, any chance you're going to try out for the team?
I mean, they have a lot of holes at wide receiver and running back. I mean, I might have a shot.
You're the same size as Deuce Vaughn, so think on it. But since you're doing this instead, let me ask you a question of, would you be willing to pay 2/3 for Dowdle at this point?
I might be open to it if I thought they were later. I probably can't get a whole lot better than that. So I think I would consider that because, like I said, I think he could push him to be a top 20 running back if he actually does take over the 60+% of the share of the backfield.
What about a 2-3 swap? Sorry, give a second, get Rico and a third. Would you make that trade potentially?
That's a maybe. It just depends on what I project for that second or the third. In a vacuum, probably not. But if I think it's a real late second, I think I would consider that for sure.
All right. So potentially willing to pay a couple thirds, not always, and certainly not a second straight up, but a 2-3 swap possibly entertaining. So just kind of owning in on the price there will bother you more in the trade section below.
All right, Justin, who is your sell from the Dallas Cowboys?
So I don't really feel like there's any screaming sells on this team. There's a lot of guys that are probably just worth like a third at the very most, or not really worth anything. Like when I was looking through just everybody, kind of their valuations on keep trade cut, etc., I think that the one I would pick would be Jake Ferguson. His keep trade cut valuation is being above Ingram and Njoku. If I could get a tier down to either of those guys and pick up something, if I could get either of those guys and like a third, either of those guys and a body running back that we're kind of interested in, I always thought like Ty Chandler is just like a target type of a player, or heck, a Rico Dowdle type, an Ezekiel Elliott type on the same team. Just somebody who's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of like that third. I'd be very ecstatic to see if I can capitalize on that value because while I do think he's going to be a PPR machine, I don't necessarily see him as having an incredibly high ceiling, although people do like to point out he had the single highest scoring game from a fantasy tight end last year, but I think that was in the fantasy playoffs or in week 18, something like that. For that reason, I just think I'm pretty willing to sell him, but I'm not dying to sell him. I've got to get that like higher keep trade cut value compared to some other values. I would also consider moving him for an early second, which is what keep trade cut insinuates you can. Like if you know it's an early second or I think it's an early second and a third type of package, I'd love to look at that in a non-tight end premium, especially.
I'm going to give you two questions here because one, I'm just curious because you brought him up. Would you do Ingram straight up?
Yeah,
I know
of
you
course.
love Ingram. Okay, I thought so.
Dumb question. I love Ingram.
I just wanted to establish that since you were saying you're trying to get a plus. Obviously, try away if you can, but just wanted to make sure. What about Njoku? Just curious.
Not Njoku, no. For some reason, I'm just lower. I do think he has a higher ceiling than Ingram. I just don't think he has the same guaranteed kind of production that Ingram does have.
That's kind of how I expected you to answer, to be honest. So that second, I was actually going to ask if Ty Chandler adding to that second would get it done. So it's hilarious to me that you brought him up. So let's just establish that a mid early second and Ty Chandler.
Non-tight end premium, I'm definitely taking that. Tight end premium, probably not.
What about just straight picks in a tight end premium second and a third?
Probably not, just because of the PPR potential that I think he has. I mean, he's not a boom player, but he's a PPR guy. And for that reason, in a tight end premium, I think at the very least it's 2 seconds. But I probably, if I'm competing, would rather almost hold at that point.
So 2 seconds or a second and a guy like maybe Singletary or Moss or something.
In a tight end premium, not entirely sure. It just depends on team construction. But
Interesting.
I almost feel like I want a first for him. I'd be willing to give something back on it, but I think his production is just it's probably going to be pretty close to what I expect from Ingram, which I'm probably not selling Ingram at a tight end premium unless I'm getting a first back, even if I have to add to it. So I just think that these PPR machine tight ends in a tight end premium league are pretty undervalued. If I'm not competing, though, I'm probably taking 2 seconds for sure.
Gotcha. So definitely a mild sell, but a sell.
Yep, I'm mild. I'll admit it. And David, who is your hold? And maybe is it a mild hold?
I mean, I guess in the sense that if I'm not competing, it's probably not a hold. So if that makes it mild, sure. I'm going to go with Dak. I think he still has several seasons of high end quarterback play ahead of him. He just entered his 30s. I just don't see a world where you get anywhere near the return of these younger guys that have the elite upside. You know, if you're positional pivoting, you're probably looking at like a Tua or a Goff or something. And they just don't have the output that Dak has. You might be able to get a little plus. Don't get me wrong. I just want to stick with Dak there. So a little data using Fantasy Pros, and I'm pretty sure it's 4 point passing touchdown, but my math could have been off. Look at the last 5 seasons. There have been 17 quarterbacks to score over 20 points per game in a season where they started at least 10 games. Only 5 of that group has done it in 3 or more of those 5 seasons. It's a pretty good list. So we got Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, maybe the first 3 picks in a dynasty startup. Lamar could be the 4th, 5th, 6th pick, something like that in a dynasty startup, and then Dak. So it's a very elite list. He's the oldest of that group for sure, but he's also by far the lowest price. And it also doesn't include his 2020 where he got hurt pretty early, but was averaging 27 points per game before he suffered that ankle injury. So I mean, it's just the consistent high-end quarterback scoring. If I'm competing, it's gonna be hard to move off of that.
I remember holding him that season when he was absolutely exploded at the beginning of the year because their defense was terrible, but it's gotten a lot better. But I really like the call of Dak as a hold. I mean, there's a lot of regression stats that I think that are going to be hitting. There's lots that I've seen where he was just shooting above his weight. That I think will come down a little bit, but I think it's already really priced in. I mean, Kirk Cousins, he's probably a little bit below Dak, you know, in terms of this season, but he's going a few rounds later and he's 5 years older. But also Dak, he's priced well below somebody like Burrow. So I think he fits perfectly as a hold on a contending roster. Now let's move on to the second place Eagles in this division. Justin, who is your buy here?
I went with the cheapest buy I could find, and that is Jalen Hurts. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to have to pony up. But given the fact that where I've seen him going in startup drafts, I've seen him going QB4, QB5 in startup drafts. And in Keep Trade Cut right now, he is at QB5 valuation. I think that this dynasty value compared to his fantasy finish is a little bit of an overreaction. I know there's fears about the tush push not coming through, etc. Fears about, you know, the offense and how it performed on the stretch last year. I know they have a new offensive coordinator. That could be good. That could be bad. There's a lot of unknown, but this guy has been great for fantasy. Whether or not people think that he's actually a great NFL quarterback, I know there's a lot of opinions that he's not, but he's under contract. Those wide receivers are under contract, and I think he's going to continue to be great for fantasy. I'm definitely very interested in seeing if I could either A, tier down from someone above him to him, because I do still have him right on the cusp of being a tier 1 dynasty quarterback, right on that cusp. So he's the one I'm most interested in tearing down to, essentially, if I have to tear down from those guys, or tearing up to him if I can do it a little bit cheaper than I would have been able to in previous years.
Now, would you pay Joe Burrow in 2 seconds to get Jalen Hurts?
I think if I am absolutely competing this year, I'm willing to do that, especially if it's a 4-point passing touchdown. Then I'm definitely willing to do that in a competing team. Even a 6-point passing touchdown, I think I'm willing to do that. If I have like a stack with Burrow, then I'm a lot less likely to do it, for example. And if it would somehow give me a hurt stack, I'm more likely to do it too, you know. But in a vacuum on a competing team, probably would pay 2 seconds if I had the capital to spend. I think I'd do that if I didn't have a lot of other holes.
Gotcha. What about Jaden Daniels, a first and a third?
I gotta research that first, man.
Oh, come on.
I hate thinking about doing it, but I think I would also pay that. Yeah, I'd be willing to pay that for the certainty of it. Jaden Daniels is so risky. Paying a first to de-risk that asset, absolutely. I do like Jaden Daniels. It's hard to say that. It hurts my. Sorry, I just need a minute to regroup after that question. You know what? Actually, instead of me regrouping, David, just tell me who your sell is. I just need a moment.
Well, good question there, JP. You threw Justin off. My sell is going to be one of those wide receivers. It'll be Devonta Smith. Like AJ Brown's under contract through 2029, and it'll take 3 years for them to save money by moving on, whether through cut or trade. And even then, it's only a couple million. So looking at more like 4 seasons before they can realistically move on. I know Smith did have a back end wide receiver 1 season, but it was only 15 PPR points per game, which is pretty low for a wide receiver 1 season. Kind of seems like he's established himself in that 13 to 16 points per game range. It's good. You want some of those guys on your team, but the way he's priced, there's other guys with much higher upside. And like he's a little older than I think some people realize. He's older than Nico. He's just a few months younger than Ayuk. They're all kind of in that same range. He's a few years older than several players in that range. I think Roma Dunze listed around him in keep trade cut. You got some quarterbacks like Tua, even Dak, guys like Pitts and Bowers, an early 25 first. Those might be a little unrealistic, but if you just pull up the rankings and look for Devonta Smith on keep trade cut, it's hard to find an asset I wouldn't take over him, to be honest with you. So when he still has that price, I'm going to go ahead and try to pivot off of him to something with a higher ceiling.
An early 25 first, you're slamming. Are you taking a random 25 first? Could go either way.
Probably. I think that's a little more setting dependent, but I think in most situations I would.
Talking about a couple of those other players in that range, would you add a third to him to get to a Dunze to kind of make a pivot to a younger asset?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Odunze is a little underpriced myself. I might even add a second to Smith to get to Odunze, to be honest with you.
I was going to ask that. I just didn't want to know the answer.
Pivoting off Smith is the move, if you ask me. JP, how about your hold for the Eagles? Who you got?
I just want to highlight Will Shipley. And just looking at the offense, the Eagles, they were 7th in points scored with a first time play caller last season. So we know that they are a great offense. I mean, clearly they have the weapons, one of which David just talked about. Even though he's a sell, he's a great wide receiver. But Will Shipley, he was discussed as a potential top 5 running back in this class early in the draft season. He was kind of on that cusp, but then he had an injury that caused him to miss the combine. And he was mostly just forgotten about throughout the process. But he still went in the 4th round of the draft as the 7th running back off the board. And he seems like he's battling Kenneth Gainwell for that RB2 job. But I think there's enough to Will Shipley's profile for me to hold unless there's something that, somebody's really offering me that's above his market value. But I just want to highlight him because I feel like he's under discussed, and I think he could be a pretty valuable handcuff running back.
Yeah, I mean, his market price is probably about a 3rd round pick. I could understand holding him rather than taking that pick, just depending. So I can agree. He's definitely somebody that Saquon's had a lot of injury histories, so don't mind that call at all. Now moving on to the New York Giants. David, who is perhaps just our podcast spy?
Last week we mentioned we were kind of becoming a Devin Singletary podcast, so how could I not pick him? At least when I was making my notes, he was RB40 on keep trade cut. RB40. There's 32 teams in the NFL. So that's not even priced as one of the top 32. He had 6 games last year with 75% or more of the snaps, and in half of those, he was a top 8 back. He's got familiarity with the head coach Dayball. He's never really had a chance to be the guy for a full season, but he's had some nice stretches. He's put together, some solid games here and there. I don't know that he'll be a league winner or anything like that, especially with the bad Giants offense that he's on. But he's going to have a ton of opportunity, and he should be an RB2 or flex play in most leagues. At that price, count me in.
Can't disagree. I mean, we've been raving about this guy. I believe we've already established this, but just for those who haven't been following along, random 25 second, are you paying that at this point if you're competing?
If I'm competing, certainly some teams I would pay that. I don't know if I would pay my only second unless I was desperate for running back help, but I think that's probably the going rate for him right now.
Would you pay a playoff second and a third for him?
I would shop around first to see if I can get that production somewhere else, like a Zach Moss or something maybe. Yeah, if I had already shopped around and that was the best thing on the table, I think I could do that.
Yeah, I think those are both reasonable. I think when we start to increase from there, certainly we're not paying 2 late seconds, anything like that. We're not entertaining a second, 2 seconds for a Singletary and a third, anything like that with a 2-3 swap involved. Yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you. I could definitely see myself partying with a late second and a third or a mid second. So I agree entirely.
And now, JP, for your sell for the New York Giants.
Yeah, my sell is pretty easy for me, but it is Jalen Hyatt. A lot of what's kind of propped him up is that in the draft process, he was talked about as, oh, this guy's a first round wide receiver. And then when he went into the third round, people were like, oh, no, he's not that. He's not a third round talent. But I've always kind of thought that he was. His reception perception profile indicated he was more just average as a route runner. Yeah, I don't think there's really anything about his profile that really gets me excited. And then he comes into the NFL. He does hardly anything as a rookie. Nothing that really gives me any sort of hope for him in the future. He had 373 yards, and you could just tell with their usage of them, they didn't really think of him as a a full field player that can do the short, intermediate, and deep parts because they just use him deep. They were just chucking it deep. So I think he's kind of more of like an MVS type of a player, and that's somebody who I see as more of a roster clogger that I'm not really interested in holding on my dynasty team.
Yeah, we certainly do not like roster clogging wide receivers. MVS may be the poster child of that tag. Definitely a good hit there. And, especially with Daniel Jones, who doesn't really push the ball down the field in the best ways. Maybe he'll be able to open some stuff up with Malik Neighbors on the team now. But yeah, I kind of agree with you on Hyatt being a sell. Let's try to get a little price here. Keep trade cut. It looks like you should be able to get a third, but I kind of think that's a little unrealistic. I assume you're smashing a third if you can.
Easily.
Would you add a fourth to Hyatt to get that third if you had to?
Yeah, and I actually did that in a league.
Nice. What about just a fourth if that's all you can get? You've shopped around, nobody's giving you a third. You taking a fourth?
It's tough. I might try to get 2/4, but yeah, honestly, I don't really see him being a consistent producer ever in his career.
Fair enough. Just trying to get out then for pretty much anything, it sounds like. And I can't really disagree with you.
Yeah, pretty much. I just don't believe in him, unfortunately. All right, Justin, who is your hold from the Giants?
For me, the screaming hold, in fact, the only player on this roster that I have any confidence will be fantasy relevant in 2025, Malik Neighbors. Maybe Singletary, his contract situation. I guess this is no longer about Singletary. Now it's about Malik Neighbors. So his upside obviously is sky high because of his talent. We just saw him in the preseason game 2 looking great. 54 yards in the first half, only played the first half. There is a lot of risk baked into his dynasty price, though. The QB situation is very bad. Right now, he's priced above AJ Brown. I could see that on a rebuild. I certainly can, but there's zero chance that I would. There's a 42% chance that I would rather have Malik Neighbors than AJ Brown on a competing team. I could see that as a good pivot if you feel like you have like a super team to stay a super team for a really long time. But in a vacuum, I prefer AJ Brown to Malik Neighbors on a competing team slightly. Not 100% like I was thinking. I can't say that out loud on a podcast. But anyways, with the price being so high that like the players he's priced around, I'm really like, really? I certainly don't think that I'm able to buy in at this point. His cheapest point was easily during the rookie drafts. Unless he busts, I don't think his profile is super likely to bust. I'm more interested in seeing if I can buy at a later time. If Daniel Jones is really bad and they can't fix the QB situation, they're just good enough that they can't get the draft picks they want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, I just think he's really good. But the price point is just where I'm no longer buying, but also I don't really want to sell.
Yeah, I think you picked the perfect hold, and that's me saying that even as the guy who's the lowest among the three of us. I mean, I still have him as a tier 3 wide receiver, though, with the guys like Adunze, Olave, and London. I just like London and Olave a little bit more because I think I can rely on them this season. And Adunze, you guys know I'm just in love with him, and I just love that he has the quarterback situation, I believe, figured out for at least the next 4+ years, if assuming, and I think he's going to stay there even longer because I think he's going to be great. But regardless, we saw Drake London. He didn't do that great, his first couple of seasons, and he still held value. And Malik Neighbors, when you look at production profile, draft capital, athleticism, Malik Neighbors is a better prospect. So even though I'm a little bit worried that he might, underwhelm similarly to Drake London, I think he'll be better than Drake London, though, because Drake London had the second fewest pass attempts through the first 2 seasons. From a team standpoint, the Falcons had the second least pass attempts over the last 2 years. But I think that he's going to hold value because of how talented he is and the flashes that he's almost certainly going to show. All right, and now we move on to the last place Washington Commanders. Justin, who is your buy from this team?
For me, at his keep trade cut price, Brian Robinson is a screaming buy. I think he is a fringe RB2, RB3 floor type of production that if this offense actually becomes a little bit of something exciting, it's a terrible defense. The offense should have to run a lot of plays. I know we don't expect him to necessarily be the third down back, but even on first and second down with a running quarterback, I think he could shred some people. Eckler could be a ghost, and maybe he does get some third down work. So I think he has the potential for bell cow usage, and at the very worst, very solid production. And he's currently ranked RB29 on Keep Trade Cut, and anybody below RB like 12, give or take, all I care about is what can you do for me this year, because I don't trust any of them to have a job next year. So at this point, like, he's a guy that I love to have on my roster.
Anybody below running back 3, you mean? No.
I mean, I do feel pretty confident in at least a handful of running backs having some sort of role next year, having a starting job based on their contract situations. Yeah, I'm willing to move any of them. You're right.
So when it comes to Brian Robinson, if you need the RB help, are you paying a random second straight up?
Maybe. If I shop around, same answer we always have. If we shop around and we don't like anybody else we can get, he is probably near the butt end of players that I'm willing to pay a 25 second for. And if it's really got a chance of missing the playoff, not just like if things go wrong, it misses the playoffs, I'd really have to vet it. I'd have to feel like they think it could miss the playoffs, but I don't think it could type of a second. Probably to be willing to do it. If it's truly random, probably not. But I guess it also depends in a PPR, half PPR, or a start 9 type of situation. Probably just half PPR is a situation where I'm willing to do it, but full PPR, maybe it has to be a late second.
Gotcha. So if you feel pretty confident to playoff second, you're probably going to do it if you need the RB help.
I think so, yeah.
Well, somebody who's ranked ahead of him is Jameson Williams. Would you rather have Brian Robinson or Jameson Williams?
I would rather have any player than Jameson Williams. Next question.
Jalen Hyatt?
I'd keep JMO. I'd keep JMO. You caught me. You caught me. But definitely Brian Robinson. No questions. David, who is your sell from the same Commanders team?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jahan Dotson. Felt a little better about this as my sell before they played last week, but it's a preseason game. He didn't have great output, but he had solid usage. Seems like they're moving him to the slot. New offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury really likes to work the slot into the offense. So we're starting to get a little Dotson hype again, which if you're holding on to him still, you love to see that as potentially a sell window. We've been using Keep Trade Cut a lot, just kind of as market value. Obviously, they're not spot on always. You see starting quarterbacks like Geno, Danny Dimes, even Sam Darnold in that area. You see running backs like Devin Singletary, Raheem Mostert. There's a bunch of wide receivers. Some are young and haven't sucked yet, and some are veterans who will outproduce Dotson. I'm trying to pivot to any of these guys depending on my team needs. If I'm rebuilding, I'm obviously trying to get one of these younger receivers or draft picks if I can. If I'm competing, just trying to fill a different team need. I think this might be your last sell window on Dotson, so I'm definitely trying to take advantage.
Now, obviously, those are pieces we're interested in. The players you mentioned. Would you be willing to take 2/3 to get him off your roster? A single third.
I think so, honestly. Yeah, no, I would.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's occasionally year 3 breakout. I don't really see much of a path here either, so I think I would take the third as well.
Yeah, and especially with the Russian quarterback there, Terry McLaurin never has hit elite wide receiver upside in fantasy, but he is a very good wide receiver. I just don't see a world where Dotson becomes a guy. So I'll get out for a third if I can. JP, how about your hold here? Someone who's come up in this episode several times.
Yeah, I mean, this one was pretty easy for me. Is Jaden Daniels. If he's great, he's going to jump into first round value in a startup, right? And if he's not that good, his value really won't be affected that much, in my opinion. I mean, we saw with Justin Fields, he was never great in the NFL, and his startup value still hovered in that third round for about 3 years. I was even in a startup right at the end of his last season with you two, and he went at the very, very end of the second round, and that was pretty close to his market value still at that time. And also, there's a pretty interesting study that I've referenced early when we first started the podcast up, and it's using DLF ADP since 2018. It's a little bit more of a smaller sample than I'd like, but in this limited sample, rookie quarterbacks that had a top 100 superflex startup value, 16 out of 19 ended up maintaining value. Those 16 either improved on their startup ADP or saw a drop of less than a round. And that's what I think we're going to get from Jaden Daniels, especially because he has that rushing floor. Herbert, we saw him as a rookie. He went from startup ADP of 89 to 7. Stroud from 21 to 5. Kyler, 42 to 7. So there's also that upside of you getting a huge value bump to your dynasty roster, and you have a pretty good security blanket on that value, because even when rookie quarterbacks are bad, there's all these narratives. The team got better. Oh, they're going to improve, because rookie quarterbacks, they typically do improve. So the narratives at least have some sort of merit to them. But I think Jaden Daniels, he's pretty hard to buy into right now because he's been rising up, especially because he's looked pretty good in the preseason as well. But I think that he is a player that I'm not going to move unless somebody's overpaying.
Yeah, we love those quarterbacks with rushing upsides, and Daniels definitely has that. I think Fields, his value and how it adjusted to him showing us he's not an NFL quarterback is definitely a good point. Kind of hard to disagree with anything you said there. I love that call there, JP. So let's go ahead and move on to the AFC East. Your defending champion Buffalo Bills. JP, who's your buy?
Yeah, my buy is Curtis Samuel, and this is a player that I haven't been the most excited about from this Bills wide receiver room. And part of it is because I'm not the biggest Keon Coleman fan, and also I think his preseason hasn't been that great. There's kind of been some mixed reviews, especially early in training camp on Keon as well. I just think that he's the only guy that can really get open outside of maybe Khalil Shakir, but I think he's kind of limited. But it's just his perception results are just so encouraging. 82nd percentile this last season against man, 66 versus zone, 57th versus press. So he's above average on all three of the coverage types. I think he's going to rotate between the slot and the flanker. And we know that this offense is going to be a high scoring offense. You're going to want to have pieces of this offense, although it might be tough to see who the clear cut wide receiver is going to be here. I just think it's going to be Curtis Samuel. And we also know that he's very, very explosive. So even if he isn't getting 130 targets, that's hard to come by. He's very explosive and he's versatile. It's been a little bit, but when he came out of college, he ran a 4.31 coming into the NFL, almost a 4.2. I feel like we forget about just how freaking athletic this guy is. And he's going to be used in the backfield too. I mean, David, he was a running back in college before he transitioned. This is the player that I would be betting on most. I talked about Khalil Shakir, how I'm a little bit worried how he plays mostly slot. They've only really used him in the slot, and they also use Dalton Kincaid in the slot. And Curtis Samuel, I think he's also going to get some run there. So he's my favorite of the group.
Yeah, I love Curtis Samuel. He will always have a special place in my heart and every Ohio State fan's heart. But this is not a college football podcast, so I will not go deeper into that. Let's see. You willing to send a projected late second for him?
I think I would, and maybe that might be aggressive to some people, but I think I would if I feel like it's a playoff second.
What if it's more random?
That's my cutoff where I wouldn't do that. I know I'm a little bit aggressive, but yeah, I won't go quite that far.
What if you're getting a third back as well? So a random second for Samuel and a mid to late third.
That'd be a maybe. I might want to shop that around first.
Fair enough. I kind of think we've established his price previously, so I just wanted to test those boundaries a little bit,
David pushing more boundaries than my students did the first week of school.
All right, Justin, you want to go ahead and give us your sell for the Bills?
Sure do. I hope that fantasy football chick's not listening because I know she has James Cook as one of her offseason buys. But when I'm looking at his price right now on Keep Trade Cut, where he's ranked, it really looks like I should be able to get 25 first for him if the price is even remotely accurate. Right around him is Zay Flowers, Jonathan Brooks, Mark Andrews, Deebo Samuels, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy. All of these are players that I expect to be able to get a 25 first for. So if he's actually in that range and I can get 25 first for him, his rushing upside, I mean, beating a dead horse here, but Josh Allen steals all the touchdowns. The over and under for Vegas on him, last I looked, was 2.5 rushing touchdowns. That was a while ago, but it was very low. And yeah, if I can get that first for him, I am all in.
So if you can get any first, would you give a third back if that's what they needed?
Probably, but if I'm paying a third, I think I would try to get a running back that's like worth but not worth a third back if possible. So if they say I need to give a third, I would try to get a backup running back of some kind back in exchange. But if I could, then I think I would still probably do a first and a third for James Cook, but it hurts.
You trading James Cook in a fourth for Zay Flowers?
I would pretty much in a vacuum almost always pivot the value to wide receiver if I could. Now, of course, if my wide receiver construction, running back construction dictates that I should keep James Cook, I won't. But in a vacuum, yeah, sure, happily.
I think that's fair enough. I also am a little bit skeptical just based on his size, and they haven't used him in the 5 zone to this third year in his career now.
Yeah, I think that just a little bit of a capped upside, although he could PPR himself some way. And David, moving on to our hold here. Can't blame you, but who is it?
Yeah, this one's really easy for me. I'm holding Josh Allen. Like, he breaks fantasy at the most important position in Superflex, which is what most of us play for Dynasty. He's been top 3 in total points and points per game over the last 4 years. And the only reason I can't say top 2 is I think 1 year Mahomes and Hurts had like just barely more points per game than him. QB1 overall in 3 of those 4 years and over 400 points in all 4. So the advantage he provides your team is just really hard to quantify. And on top of that, we've just been talking about his receiving weapons that aren't great. I think that is kind of depressing his market value somewhat. I'm not willing to sell him for a discount. I'm just going to hold and assume he's going to continue to be that quarterback one for at least a couple more years. I'm going to go out and try to win some championships with him.
Only way I'd be willing to sell him is if I was selling high, and I think you're right. The market's a little depressed. So for that reason, I would hold as well. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins, David, hit me up with your buy and make sure not to steal anybody from our friend earlier on, like any of their holds.
Yeah, we've actually. I think in the community question, everyone that got mentioned is getting mentioned below, which is kind of cool when it lines up like that. My buy is Raheem Mostert. Like he's cheap points, very cheap points. We're probably going to see some touchdown regression. Probably don't expect a top 5 RB finish again, but he's priced like he might not even have a starting role. And all indications are he's going to have his role back that he had last year. It's pretty much the same offense, going to be high powered. And, just one comparison I want to make, and I'll point out that I'm not completely out on Henry at his current price, but he's also over 30. He's also his value is pretty much based on huge touchdown upside. So I think it's kind of a fair comparison. Henry's RB16, while Mostert is 41 on Keep Trade Cut. That's a huge difference to me, and I don't fully understand it. I agree Henry should have a higher price than Mostert, but not by that much.
Yeah, I mean, the running back position is a very weird one to rank after a certain point because it's just all what can you do for me this year? And Henry is certainly what can you do for me this year, as is Mostert. Now, are you willing to pay 2/3 for Mostert?
I think on some teams, yes. If I have 2/3, sure. I'll figure that out.
Late second?
That's where I kind of get worried. He is older and he does have an injury history, so I might try to find something I'm a little more confident in. But every running back has injury history. Every running back has injury risk. Mostert has top 5 upside. Not everybody has top 5 upside.
Yeah, absolutely. That late second line, if you get a fourth back, are you considering that?
I think I'd probably either need a third or
Ty Taylor.
yeah, maybe Titanium. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, our favorite fill-in running back for a third round value.
JP pick it up like he never missed an episode.
Nice to have you back, buddy.
Well, I feel like we've kind of established a line there.
Yeah, I think so as well. So JP, let's move on and get your sell for the Dolphins.
Yeah, my sell is Tua, and I'll admit I'm a little bit lower on Tua just as a talent in general. I think he's got some good parts to his game, but with a lot of the NFL film watchers that I listen to, they're not a big fan of his talent just based on like what he does in the pocket, the mobility, the arm talent. They just are a little bit lower on him in those aspects. But last year, we know he had elite playmakers at running back and wide receiver. I mean, Tyreek Hill is one of the best wide receivers in the league. Jalen Waddle's probably a wide receiver one level of talent. And also, we know Mostert, as you just talked about, and HN, they're super explosive. And I think Mike McDaniel's top 10 play caller in the league. So with these phenomenal, surrounding parts that Tua had, he led the NFL in passing yards. So they had a great offense. And unfortunately, for the second year in a row, they just tailed off the end. We'll see if that's a trend once more when it starts to get cold. But even with him leading the NFL in passing yards in a 6-point passing touchdown format, he was still 19th in fantasy points per game. Now, David, he pointed out it kind of varies a little bit from what platform we're looking at. But when you're not giving me top 12 numbers, when you're leading the league in passing yards, that definitely worries me for your ceiling and just where his value is. I just want to have a little bit more upside. And if I can pivot to any of the guys that are in the tier above him, like I would love to tier up to Dak. I even prefer Jared Goff. And man, if I could get one of those tier 3 quarterbacks, I would way, way, way prefer that. And I'd be willing to pay a decent bit to do so.
Well, I actually kind of like Tua, so I'm going to push back just a little bit. Looking at that 19th overall finish, which was kind of surprising, I'll be honest. Once I upped the minimum games played to 9, he moved to 15th, which still not great. I'll give you that, but moves him in the right direction. The big thing I noticed though is he was less than 1 point per game from being a back end QB1, and only 2 teams over the last 4 seasons had more rushing touchdowns than the Dolphins did last year. So it's not unreasonable to think that maybe he gets a couple extra passing touchdowns out of it. Just 3 more passing touchdowns, he would have been a QB1. So, I mean, we're still not talking about elite upside. I get that. But like you said, he's got his elite play caller. He's got Tyreek and Waddle back. He's got a chain and Mostert. He's only 26. I think he's got more upside than Goff for sure. I would definitely prefer Tua straight up. If I can pivot up for a reasonable price, I'm all for doing that. But let's go ahead and talk about a price. So are you selling him for a random 25 first? Take a little bit more than that.
I would consider it. I definitely would have to see what my quarterback room looks like. But if I had a QB3 behind him that I felt pretty decent with, I would consider it if I wasn't competing for sure.
Then what about that tier up? You going to add a second to him to get to Dak?
I would personally, because I think we saw what Dak Prescott did last year. I mean, he was able to give us that top 8 kind of quarterback play when Tua couldn't.
What about Purdy?
I actually kind of like Purdy a little bit more than Tua in the NFL, and I know that might be kind of shocking, but Yeah, I would
You adding a
rather.
second?
Yeah, I would, just based on Kyle Shanahan and just like the weapons that they have right now. I think they might be last a little bit longer than Tyreek.
I think you might have to look at adding a first potentially in a deal to get up to those guys. When we raise the price to that, are you willing to entertain that, JP?
Probably not at that point. No, if they kick back a second,
For like May, would you add a first to get to May? Is that too much?
I think so. Just based on where the market is, I think Tua and Drake May they're going fairly similar. I guess in a startup, just from a market perspective, I probably wouldn't, but I'd probably be willing to pay a second just because I think Drake May he has that ceiling to be a first round, startup value kind of quarterback, and I'd be willing to take that swing.
All right, last one. The guy we've talked about the most this episode. Are you adding a first to get to Daniels?
I think I do. I think I do.
So, Justin, how about your hold?
So my hold is going to be Tyreek Hill. So obviously, I'm not holding Tyreek Hill if I'm rebuilding. I might for a week or two until people remember how crooked numbers he can put up, but I don't really want him to mess my max points up too much. So trying to move him by week 3, see if I can play a couple bidders against each other. But if I'm competing, and I actually have quite a bit of Tyreek Hill exposure myself. In fact, I bought a share from you this offseason, David, when you were looking to rebuild on one team. He's just a guy that I don't really want to buy that much more because as the point scoring season's upon us, he's getting to be that like 2 firsts or more type of price point again. Like from a lot of players, you're gonna have to pay like almost 2 firsts to get this guy. And it's hard to stomach doing it. But I'm also not selling for less than 2 firsts. And I don't think a lot of people want to pay that for a 30-year-old, almost 30-year-old wide receiver. So for that reason, just in the fact that this man can put up numbers like nobody's business. He's easily a top 3 redraft pick. He's in consideration for the first pick in redraft. I think if you're competing, you just got to hold him and hope that you cash out of the chip. Pivot some other assets to younger players and hope that he can carry you instead.
Yeah, I mean he's really gonna I think increase his value probably up here when he's scoring the points. We always say wait for point scoring season for these kind of elite older players. And I think people are really going to be wanting to buy him if they think it's going to push them over the edge. Even if you are rebuilding, yeah, maybe then you will sell. But I think he's a great hold for a contending roster for sure.
And JP, moving along to the next year's NFL champions, the New York Jets. You heard it here first. Just kidding. Maybe. Who is your buy?
My buy is Braylon Allen. And part of it is due to what we've seen in the preseason. I think he's looked really good. Brees Hall, we know that he's there, and obviously he is the RB1. But if there's an injury to Brees Hall, I think Braylon Allen could be a player that it is a full fab dump, in redraft leagues, and people are going to be really wanting to hit this guy because he can handle the workload because he has the size. We've seen it in college. He handled the workload when he was 17 years old in college. And he's a pretty decent pass catcher. So I think that this guy, he could be used at the goal line. He could be used in the passing down situations. And those are the most valuable kind of touches that we want to see in fantasy. And this should be more of a run heavy offense as well. I mean, Aaron Rodgers at his age, I don't expect them to be top 10 in pass attempts. So I think that they could really lean on him. Who knows in a couple of years if they for some reason don't pay Brees Hall. I think there's a scenario where if he does impress, kind of like how Alexander Madison did. Great comparison there, I know. But they might think that they can lean on him after the incumbent leaves. So I do think that he's going to hold value for a few years and be a pretty nice piece if injury does occur.
Hard to believe with this sweatshirt behind me, but I'm a Braylon Allen fan in general. Might be a Badgers fan. Now, are you paying a random 25 third for him at this point, even though there's no guarantee he can do anything for you anytime soon?
Probably not everywhere, not in every league, but I think I would be willing to if I wanted to have that swing, just if my RB depth was a little bit thin. Not in every scenario.
But if you could get him for, let's say, 3 fourth round picks, would you be willing to do that?
I think so. Yeah, I think anytime I could trade 3/4 to get a third, I would do that.
A mid third is about the price point you're looking for. Late third and a fourth, would you do that?
I think I'd consider it. I think just fourth round picks, I'm just don't care about much at this time of year, especially.
Mid third is about 50-50. I could see buying for that price if I didn't already have such high exposure myself.
Yeah, and I don't. I only got one share, so that's why with his preseason performance, I've been kind of more interested here lately. All right, David, who's your sell here on the Jets?
Yeah, I'm going big fish hunting here with my sell. I'm picking Brees. And I'll be clear, this isn't really me saying I'm trying to get out of my Brees Hall shares. It's honestly more because I think most of the players on this offense are more useful to you than their price. And then the one you could argue isn't is Garrett Wilson, and we've already established how I feel about him. So we're gonna go with Brees Hall. It really just goes back to the running back position. If I can have my core players not be running backs, then that's my preference, especially because Brees already has that knee injury in his career. You can probably pivot from him to another elite wide receiver or tight end or quarterback with a much longer shelf life. So I would explore that if I had him. I'd also consider a tier down where you get a first, maybe even more than a first, to move down to a guy like Pacheco, Kenneth Walker. I think maybe even James Cook would be on the table for that kind of thing. Rashad White. Obviously, none of those guys are going to score like Brees, but you're getting a first plus. So not a hard sell, a mild sell, as we put it earlier in the show, right?
Bold move, Cotton.
Would you sell him for Romadunze?
I think I would need a little plus at this point. I could easily see a world where Odunze is worth more next year, but I think the safer bet would be on Brees there from a market standpoint specifically.
Would you do it for Trey McBride in a second?
We got a premium in this league, tight end premium.
Yeah, just a 1.5.
Ooh, just a 1.5. Can't make it easy on me, huh? I think I would do that if I had a strong enough running back room and needed the tight end help. Yeah. And Justin, how about your hold for this team?
Not a lot of assets outside of one running back and one wide receiver that you really want to be holding on this team. I've also tried to shop around Mike Williams for a third in a few leagues I have him in, sent out the offer to every single manager and have not been able to get that third. I don't know if I'm paying a third for him, but if I have him on a team, I think he's a pretty solid hold. I think that it's not a great bet. It's a guy I'm taking a decent amount of shares of in best ball because he could do something. He's a talented player, and if somehow Aaron Rodgers comes back, I can see a world where he could be actually useful for us. And he's ranked around where like Jalen Hyatt is in keep trade cut. So I just think he's the type of guy that I'm certainly not looking to buy. I'd sell if there was a market, but there's not really. So just a hold for me and somebody who I'm at least a little bit interested in seeing what he can do.
Yeah, I think the point about not having a market is the biggest part of this one. Kind of like I said when I was talking about why I'm selling Brees, there's just a lot of guys who don't really want to sell for what you could get because they might be more useful to you. I think Mike Williams is a pretty good example of that. So let's move on to the last place Patriots. Justin, who is your buy?
I'm going to be buying Drake May. I think based off of his keep trade cut valuation, he's being valued pretty close to a random 25 first, a little bit higher than it, but close enough to a random 25 first that he should be an early 25 first based off of what we think about that quarterback class and what we thought about him not that long ago. You know, the wide receiver room here, it's looking mediocre, but could be serviceable. I could almost see some parallels to the Packers wide receiver room last year of it's a young room, and if they somehow hit, if some of these players hit a little bit, they could be a little bit better than we think. I certainly don't think they have anybody who's as good as the Packers have, but just in the fact that there's a lot of young guys there and it could be more exciting than we think. He has the potential to have rushing upside. And when you look at the guys that are priced in that range, quarterback wise, if I can pivot from a Goff or if I can pivot from a Tua to him, I'm almost always going to be looking to make that type of a pivot. And I think in some situations with the big contracts that they just got and the fact that there's just not as much hype as there was for May previously, you might even be able to tier down from those guys to May. And I might be willing to pay a little bit to tier up from them to him.
So would you pay a second on top of either of them to get to May? I think you would have to add to Tua and Goff to get to May personally.
I think in most leagues you absolutely would. I'd see if I could make it a 2-3 swap, but if I have somebody else like in the range of like a Kirk Cousins that is my QB3 that I can slide in until I feel comfortable with May or that I could just start instead, or if I can figure out a QB3 situation some other way, then yeah, I'm willing to move that second on top of those guys to get that upside, but it is risky. That's the type of play that you don't make unless you can stomach the loss, because there is also the chance that you're lighting Drake May on fire, but you play to win the game, and Drake May has a chance to win the game for you, like JP mentioned earlier. So yeah, I'd pony up.
All right, now let's go to just cash price. You said random 25 first easy. What if it's your 25 first and you're not the clear cut 101, but you're probably not making the playoffs?
If it's mine, probably not, because I'm going to push that to the 101 if I'm not making the playoffs, or at least the 102, 103. And I like next year's class quite a bit. But if it's somebody else's and they have no motivation to not push it down, then I do think at this point I do like him better than any other quarterback in next year's QB class. So yeah, if it's not mine, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, I just wanted to see if you would move yours, because I think that is definitely different than moving someone else's.
It sure is, and I sure would not. Now, who are we selling, JP?
Now, I'm selling Demario Douglas, and this is a player that I like decently, but I just think that he's very limited in what he can do. When I look at his reception perception results, he ran a really, really high rate of just the short routes. It was the screens, he was above average, the slant, the flat, and other stuff in the backfield. He didn't really do anything in the intermediate and deep portions of the field. And they have guys like Javon Baker and Jalen Polk. Obviously, they're not established. I think Baker's got a lower floor, but I think his ceiling is way higher. I think Polk's floor and ceiling are higher. And his offense, it doesn't project to be that great anyways, at least where we sit right now. And also, I could easily see a scenario where next year they bring in a first round wide receiver, maybe an Ayuk or T. Higgins. We already saw that they are interested in bringing in a player like Brandon Ayuk. They were in that sweepstakes. So I just think that DeMar Douglas, even if he does maybe do a little bit more than we expect, I don't think his value really is going to go up that much because I just don't think that there's a whole lot to him other than just, like I said, in the slants, the screens, and that doesn't really get a lot of people excited. For the Patriots, yeah, it was a pretty good hit for like a day 3 pick, but in general, I just don't think that he has the potential to be a wide receiver 2 on a good offense.
Yeah, and on top of that, like we talked about in our preseason week 2 recap video earlier this week, he did not play in any of the 2 wide receiver sets that they had. So never loved to see that either. So I definitely agree with that. Now let's narrow in on that price. Are you taking a random 25 third for him?
I would.
Are you taking a late 25 third?
Maybe not because no pun intended, he might pop a little bit early in the season, but I might consider it if I'm rebuilding. I just want to get the points off my roster.
Yeah, I think I would take it in a vacuum too. Not in best ball, but yeah. So somewhere around that mid third, yeah, late third, maybe. Price range, I think David and I. Would you also take the late third, David?
I would.
We hate them wide receivers in this range.
You guys certainly do. All right, David, who is your hold on the Patriots?
Yeah, I'm gonna double dip here, and I'm gonna go with a couple guys you were just talking about. I'm gonna hold Baker and Polk. I think I like them both as prospects. I was really high on Baker, came around to liking Polk by the end of the process. They don't really have anybody above them on the depth chart, so they're gonna have an opportunity if they are good to show us that they're good. We like May as a prospect. Obviously, a lot of risk involved with any rookie quarterback, but if he hits, one of these guys shows that they're a stud, there's a ton of cheap upside right there. Next year's a little murky, I get that, but this is the year that they have to prove themselves and they have tons of opportunity to do so. I don't see, getting a third or, maybe a second for Polk if you're lucky. And that's what you had to pay for him, but I don't know that many people are willing to pay that right now. I'm just going to hold and I'm going to see how this plays out, at least for, first few weeks of the season, but most likely the whole season, to be honest.
I see some parallels to the Texans, just potentially. The Texans last year, we were like, all this offense is absolutely disgusting. And I think there's at least some potential that there are players that really, really rise like that scenario last year. That's an extreme example, but I do see some similarities here for the Patriots.
Can't disagree with that. Now moving along to some trades involving some of these players. So again, all of our trades are always pulled from dynasty-daddy.com. These are trades that are from real leagues. So we want to just give some comments on what's going on in actual leagues, not just what we think.
All right, our first trade's for you, Justin. We've got 12 teams, start 11, full PPR. You'd taken Drake May and Jalen Polk, couple guys we just talked about, or Jared Goff and Josh Downs.
So Jalen Polk and Josh Downs, I definitely prefer Jalen Polk to Josh Downs, but the reality is it's probably the Spider-Man meme, probably the same guy. And the fact that I get to stack the Spider-Man meme guy by having Drake May and Polk on one side, I'm definitely taking that side. If you took off the wide receivers, in a vacuum, I would take May over Goff for the upside. So easy for me. Moving on to you now, David. Start 9, 1.5 tight end premium, Sam Laporta and Brian Robinson or Brees Hall. I think we already asked you this question.
I was going to say, this is basically the what McBride in a second question. Yeah, it's start 9. It's also a half tight end premium, so that doesn't make it easy for me. I think more times than not, I'm going to take the package. If I don't have the running back depth to move on from Brees Hall, especially in a start 9, then I kind of got to hold on to him. But, in a start 9, Laporta is also a positional advantage, so I'm probably going to make this move, but it is a little bit roster dependent.
And JP, on that Tua question, I feel like I know who you're going to say here, JSN and JJ McCarthy or Tua?
Yeah, I'm definitely going McCarthy and JSN, and that's probably a really big just rebuild move, but I just think that McCarthy might have the same amount of value as Tua this time next year, so I'm definitely going to go with that side.
I can see that. I can see why the other person made the trade as well, needing to get a starting quarterback that will hold some value for sure in Tua. I'm not as big on JSN. I'm curious, David, can I ask you on this one too?
Yeah, this one depends for me. I'm going to take McCarthy and Jason most of the time, but if I'm competing and can't afford to lose a quarterback, then I got to find a different way. Difficult to trade from a good starting quarterback to a guy who's going to miss the whole year. I love that package there.
You might be able to reach out to a rebuilding team. Say, hey, if I got McCarthy, could I get Baker and whatever, extra on top? So I think just I would take that every scenario.
And Justin, back to you. We've got 12 teams start 10 full PPR half tight end premium. Jason on the block again. Jason in a 25 fourth or James Cook in a 25 third.
If I'm not allowed to make any more trades after this, I would take the James Cook side. But because this is Dynasty Fantasy Football and I send out several trade offers a day, by the way, can some of y'all respond to some more of those? I have way too many inbox offers, but I digress. I'm going to go the JSN side and then I'm going to flip JSN for a first because
You can bring him to me.
let's do it. There's a trade. So it's a no brainer for me to take the JSN side because I would do James Cook for a first with a 3-4 swap. So let's do it. And on your Devin Singletary, or perhaps our Devin Singletary love, what will you do in a start 10 when it's Deontay Johnson or Devin Singletary? And you know you'll break my heart if you say Devin Singletary.
Well, as much as we love Devin Singletary, we also love Deontay Johnson. My love for him runs a little bit deeper. I think he's going to be more useful this year, and I think he definitely has a safer projection going forward past this year. I can't imagine a team where I'm not going to take Deontay.
Speaking of Deontay, I just checked. I'm accidentally through 8 drafts at 88% exposure to Deontay Johnson.
Nice.
Better hope he's good.
Boom bust, baby. And our very last trade of the day, JP. Start 10, Rico Dowdle and a second or Zamir White.
I'm taking Dowdle in the second. Honestly, I think that the ceiling for White and Dowdle are pretty similar just because, Dowdle, he might be getting a little bit less of the market share of the backfield, but the offense, I think, is going to be way, way better. And Zamir White, we've never seen him really catch passes. So that's a smash. I would definitely take Dowdle in the second.
I think I might take the White side if I'm competing. In a rebuild, 100% I would take the other side because I would take a second for White if I was full rebuilding anyways, and Dowdle's a nice piece. All right, so that wraps up our episode here. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope this was useful for you as it was for us. Please make sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.